Side 2. The morning after the children had been the possessors of boundless wealth, they awoke without any of the enthusiastic happiness which they had felt on the previous day, when they remembered how they had had the luck to find the Samiad, or Sand Fairy, and to receive its promise to grant them a new wish every day. For now they had had 2 wishes, beauty and wealth, and neither had exactly made them happy. During breakfast, some efforts were made to deal with the question of the Samiad in an impartial spirit. The lamb was still in the hands of Martha, having its clothes changed, so conversation was possible. Anthea and Robert timidly tried to conceal their inmost thought, which was that the Samiad was not to be trusted. "Well, let's let the tiresome beast alone," Robert said, "and just go and have a jolly good game of forts on our own in the chalk pit." Cyril and Jane were more hopeful. They generally were. "I don't think the Samiad does it on purpose," Cyril said. "And after all, it was silly to wish for boundless wealth. We must try and find a really useful wish, and wish it." Jane dropped her work and said, "I think so too. It's too silly to have a chance like this and not use it. Do let's think hard and wish something nice, so that we can have a real jolly day, what there is left of it." During the conversation, it had been decided that £50 in 2-shilling pieces was the right wish to have, and the lucky children hurriedly started for the gravel pit to express their wishes to the Samiad. Martha caught them at the gate and insisted on their taking the baby with them. "Not want him, indeed? You know you promised your ma to take him out every blessed day," said Martha. With this and a kiss, she plumped the lamb into Anthea's arms and went back to make new pinafores on the sewing machine. The lamb laughed with pleasure and rode on Robert's back with yells of joy, and altogether made himself so agreeable that nobody could long be sorry that he was of the party. It was settled that, as soon as they had wished for the money and got it, they would get Mr. Crispin to drive them into Rochester again, taking Martha with them, if they could not get out of taking her, and they would make a list of things they really wanted before they started. Full of high hopes and excellent resolutions, they went round the safe, slow cart road to the gravel pits, and as they went in between the mounds of gravel, a sudden thought came to them, for now they remembered that yesterday they had not had time to mark the spot where the Samiad was, with a ring of stones as before. "Never mind," said the hopeful Jane. "We'll soon find him." But this, though easily said, was hard in the doing. They looked, and though they found their seaside spades, nowhere could they find the Sand Fairy. At last, they all had to sit down and rest. The lamb was as frisky as a sandhopper. He watched his opportunity and threw a handful of sand into Anthea's face, and then suddenly buried his own head in the sand and waved his fat legs in the air. Then, of course, the sand got into his eyes, and he howled. It was then that Robert, usually a very patient brother, so far forgot himself as to say, "Who would want him? He's a little nuisance, that's what he is. It's too bad. I only wish everybody did want him with all their hearts. We might get some peace in our lives." The lamb stopped howling now, and there was a little silence. The silence was broken by a sigh, a breath suddenly let out. The children's heads turned as if there was a string tied to each nose, and someone had pulled all the strings at once. And everyone saw the Sand Fairy sitting quite close to them, with the expression which it used as a smile on its hairy face. "Good morning," it said. "I did that quite easily. Everyone wants him now." "It doesn't matter," said Robert sulkily, because he knew he had been behaving rather like a pig. "No matter who wants him. There's no one here to, anyhow." "Ingratitude," said the Samiad, "is a dreadful vice." "Oh, we're not ungrateful," Jane made haste to say, "but we didn't really want that wish. Robert only just said it. Can't you take it back and give us a new one?" "No, I can't," said the Sand Fairy shortly. "Chopping and changing, it's not business. You ought to be careful what you do wish." Suddenly, the lamb perceived that something brown and furry was near him. "Poof, poof, poofy," he said, and made a grab. The Psammead's fur stood on end with horror, and it dug with its hands and feet and vanished in an instant in a whirl of sand. The children marked the spot with a ring of stones. "We may as well get along home," said Robert. "I'll say I'm sorry. But anyway, if it's no good, it's no harm, and we know where the sandy thing is for tomorrow." They were nearly home when a dreadful thing happened. Turning a corner suddenly, they came upon 2 vans, a tent, and a company of gypsies encamped by the side of the road. A lot of ragged children were industriously making dust pies in the road. 2 men lay on the grass smoking, and 3 women were doing the family washing in an old red watering can with the top broken off. In a moment, all the gypsies surrounded Anthea and the baby. "Let me hold him, little lady," said one of the gypsy women. "Rather not," said Anthea. "Let me have him," said the other woman. "I've 19 of my own, so I have." "No," said Anthea bravely, but her heart beat so that it nearly choked her. Then one of the men pushed forward. "Swelp me if it ain't," he cried. "My own long-lost child. Have he a strawberry mark on his left ear? No? Then he's my own babby, stolen from me in innocent infancy. Hand him over, and we'll not have the law on you this time." He snatched the baby from Anthea, who turned scarlet and burst into tears of pure rage. The others were standing quite still. Cyril was quite white. He was silent a minute, thinking hard. Then he said, "We don't want to keep him if he's yours, but you see, he's used to us. You shall have him if you want him." "No, no," cried Anthea, and Cyril glared at her. "But of course we want him," said the women, trying to get the baby out of the man's arms. The lamb howled loudly. "Oh, he's hurt," shrieked Anthea, and Cyril in a savage undertone bade her, "Stow it. You trust me," he whispered. "Look here," he went on. "He's awfully tiresome with people he doesn't know very well. Suppose we stay here a bit till he gets used to you, and then when it's bedtime, I give you my word of honour we'll go away and let you keep him if you want to." "That's fair enough," said the man who was holding the baby. The gypsies whispered together, and Cyril took the chance to whisper too. He said, "Sunset. We'll get away then." And then his brothers and sisters were filled with wonder and admiration at his having been so clever as to remember this. "Oh, do let him come to us," said Jane. "See, we'll sit down here and take care of him for you till he gets used to you." "What about dinner?" said Robert suddenly. "You don't mind my just running home to get our dinner?" he said to the gypsy. "I can bring it out here in a basket." His brother and sisters felt themselves very noble and despised him. They did not know his thoughtful secret intention. But the gypsies did in a minute. "Oh, yes," they said, "and then fetch the police with a pack of lies about it being your baby instead of ours. D'you ever catch a weasel asleep?" they asked. "If you're hungry, you can pick a bit along of us," said the light-haired gypsy woman, not unkindly. "Here, Levi, give the kid to the little lady and see if they can't get him used to us a bit." So the lamb was handed back, but the gypsies crowded so closely that he could not possibly stop howling. Then the man with the red handkerchief said, "Here, Pharaoh, make up the fire, and you girls see to the pot. Give the kid a chance." So the gypsies, very much against their will, went off to their work, and the children and the lamb were left sitting on the grass. "He'll be all right at sunset," Jane whispered, "but oh, it is awful. Suppose they are frightfully angry when they come to their senses. They might beat us or leave us tied to trees or something." "No, they won't," Anthea said. "Oh, my lamb, don't cry any more. It's all right. Panty's got too ducky. They aren't unkind people, or they wouldn't be going to give us any dinner." "Dinner?" said Robert. "I won't touch their nasty dinner. It would choke me." But when the dinner was ready, it turned out to be supper, and happened between 4 and 5, they were all glad enough to take what they could get. It was boiled rabbit with onions, and some bird rather like a chicken, but stringier about its legs and with a stronger taste. The lamb had bread soaked in hot water and brown sugar sprinkled on the top. He liked this very much, and consented to let the two gypsy women feed him with it as he sat on Anthea's lap. By the time the shadows grew long and black across the meadows, the lamb had really taken to the woman with the light hair, and even consented to kiss his hand to the children and to stand up and bow with his hand on his chest, like a gentleman, to the two men. The whole gypsy camp was in raptures with him, but his brothers and sisters longed for sunset. The shadows got longer and longer, and at last the sun was out of sight behind the hill, but he had not really set yet. But the gypsies were getting impatient. "Now, young uns," the red-handkerchiefed man said, "it's time you were laying your heads on your pillows, so it is. The kid's all right and friendly with us now, so you just hand him over and sling that hook of yours like you said." The women and children came crowding round the lamb. Arms were held out, fingers snapped invitingly, friendly faces beaming with admiring smiles. But all failed to tempt the loyal lamb. He clung with arms and legs to Jane, who happened to be holding him, and uttered the gloomiest roar of the whole day. "It's no good," the woman said. "Hand the little poppet over, miss. We'll soon quiet him." And still the sun would not set. "Tell her about how to put him to bed," whispered Cyril. "Anything to gain time, and be ready to bolt when the sun really does make up its silly old mind to set." "Yes, I'll hand him over in just a minute," Anthea began, talking very fast. "But do let me just tell you that he has a warm bath every night and cold in the morning, and he has a crockery rabbit to go into the warm bath with him, and little Samuel saying his prayers in white china on a red cushion for the cold bath." The woman laughed. "As if I hadn't never bathed a babby," she said. "Come, give us a hold of him. Come to Amelia, my precious." "Go away, Ugsy," replied the lamb at once. "Yes, but," Anthea went on, "about his meals. You really must let me tell you, he has an apple or a banana every morning, and bread and milk for breakfast, and an egg for his tea sometimes, and—" "I've brought up 10, said the black ringleted woman, "besides the others. Come, miss, and hand him over. I'll bear it no longer. I must give him a hug." "We ain't settled yet whose he's to be, Esther," said one of the men. "It won't be you, Esther, with 7 of 'em at your tail already." "I ain't so sure of that," said Esther's husband. "And ain't I nobody to have a say neither," said the husband of Melia. Everyone was getting very angry. Suddenly, a change swept over them, as if some invisible sponge had wiped away these cross and anxious expressions and left only a blank. The children saw that the sun really had set, but they were afraid to move, and the gypsies were feeling so muddled that they could not say a word. It was an awkward moment. Suddenly Anthea, greatly daring, held out the lamb to the red-handkerchief man. "Here he is," she said. The man drew back. "Oh, I shouldn't like to deprive you, miss," he said hoarsely. "Anyone who likes can have my share of him," said the other man. "After all, I've got enough of my own," said Esther. "Then, shall we take him away?" said Anthea. "Well, suppose you do," said Pharaoh heartily, "and we'll say no more about it." And with great haste, all the gypsies began to be busy about their tents for the night. All but Amelia. She went with the children as far as the bend in the road, and there she said, "Let me give him a kiss, miss. I don't know what made us go for to behave so silly. Us gypsies don't steal babies, whatever they may tell you when you're naughty. We've enough of our own mostly, but I've lost all mine." She leaned towards the lamb, and he, looking in her eyes, unexpectedly put up a grubby, soft paw and stroked her face. "Paw, paw," said the lamb, and he let the gypsy woman kiss him, and what is more, he kissed her brown cheek in return. Then the gypsy woman turned and went back to her home, the tent by the grassy roadside. The children looked after her till she was out of sight, and they went home, very late for tea and unspeakably late for dinner. Martha scolded, of course, but the lamb was safe. The next day was a very hot day indeed. Anthea awoke at 5. She dressed and folded up her nightgown. Then she took her shoes in her hand and crept softly down the stairs, opened the dining room window, and climbed out. Her heart was beating very fast, for she was carrying out a plan quite her own. She could not be sure it was a good plan, but she was quite sure that it would not be any better if she were to tell the others about it. And she had a feeling that, right or wrong, she would rather go through with it alone. She put on her shoes under the iron veranda, on the red and yellow shining tiles, and then she ran straight to the sandpit and found the Psammead's place and dug it out. It was very cross indeed. "It's too bad," it said, fluffing up its fur like pigeons do their feathers at Christmas time. "The weather's Arctic, and it's the middle of the night." "I'm so sorry," said Anthea gently, and she took off her white pinafore and covered the sand fairy up with it, all but its head, its bat's ears, and its eyes that were like snail's eyes. "Thank you," it said. "That's better. What's the wish this morning?" "I don't know," she said. "That's just it. You see, we've been very unlucky so far. I wanted to talk to you about it, but would you mind not giving me any wishes till after breakfast? It's so hard to talk to anyone if they jump out at you with wishes you don't really want." "You shouldn't say you wish for things if you don't wish for them." "I'll try not," said Anthea. "But I do wish—" "Look out," said the Psammead in a warning voice, and it began to blow itself out. "Oh, this isn't a magic wish, it's just— I should be so glad if you'd not swell yourself out and nearly burst to give me anything just now. Wait till the others are here." Well, well," it said indulgently, but it shivered. "Would you," said Anthea kindly, "would you like to come and sit on my lap?" Anthea had never expected that it would, but it did. "Thank you," it said. "You really are rather thoughtful." It crept onto her lap and snuggled down, and she put her arms round it with a rather frightened gentleness. "Now then," it said. "Well then," said Anthea, "everything we have wished has turned out rather horrid. I wish you would advise us. You are so old, you must be very wise." "You see," Anthea went on, "it's such a wonderful thing, such a splendid, glorious chance. It's so good and kind and dear of you to give us our wishes, and it seems such a pity that it should all be wasted just because we are too silly to know what to wish for." "Child," said the Sand Fairy sleepily, "I can only advise you to think before you speak." "But won't you just say if you think wings would be a silly wish?" "Wings?" it said. "I think you might do worse. Only take care you aren't flying high at sunset." "Oh, I'm so sleepy. Goodbye." It jumped off her lap, dug frantically, and vanished. Anthea was late for breakfast. It was Robert who quietly poured a spoonful of treacle down the lamb's frock, so that he had to be taken away and washed thoroughly. And it was, of course, a very naughty thing to do, yet it served two purposes. It delighted the lamb, who loved above all things to be completely sticky, and it engaged Martha's attention so that the others could slip away to the sandpit without the lamb. They did it, and in the lane Anthea, breathless from the scurry of that slipping, panted out, "I want to propose we take turns to wish, only nobody's to have a wish if the others don't think it's a nice wish. Do you agree?" "Who's to have the first wish?" said Robert cautiously. "Me, if you don't mind," said Anthea apologetically, "and I've thought about it, and it's wings." There was a silence. The others rather wanted to find fault, but it was hard, because the word wings raised a flutter of joyous excitement in every breast. They found the sand fairy easily, and without further delay Anthea said, "We wish we all had beautiful wings to fly with." The sand fairy blew himself out, and next moment each child felt a funny feeling, half heaviness and half lightness on its shoulders. The wings were very big, and more beautiful than you could possibly imagine, for they were soft and smooth, and every feather lay neatly in its place, and the feathers were of the most lovely mixed changing colours like the rainbow. "Oh, but can we fly?" Jane said, standing anxiously first on one foot and then on the other. "Look out," said Cyril. "You're treading on my wing." "Does it hurt?" said Anthea with interest. But no one answered, for Robert had spread his wings and jumped up, and now he was slowly rising in the air. He looked very awkward in his knickerbocker suit, but the others cared but little how he looked, or how they looked for that matter, for now they all spread out their wings and rose in the air. They flapped and flew and sailed on their great rainbow wings between green earth and blue sky, and they flew right over Rochester and then swerved round towards Maidstone, and presently they all began to feel extremely hungry. Curiously enough, this happened when they were flying rather low, and just as they were crossing an orchard where some early plums shone red and ripe. "Yes, I dare say," said Cyril, though no one had spoken, "but stealing is stealing even if you've got wings." "Do you really think so?" said Jane briskly. "If you've got wings, you're a bird, and no one minds birds breaking the commandments. At least they may mind, but the birds always do it, and no one scolds them or sends them to prison." It was not so easy to perch on a plum tree as you might think, but somehow they all managed to do it, and the plums were certainly very sweet and juicy. Fortunately, it was not till they had all had quite as many plums as were good for them that they saw a stout man, who looked exactly as though he owned the plum trees, come hurrying through the orchard gate with a thick stick, and with one accord they disentangled their wings from the plum-laden branches and began to fly. The man stopped short, with his mouth open, for he had seen the boughs of his trees moving and twitching, and he had said to himself, "Them young varmints at it again." But when he saw the rainbow wings flutter up out of the plum tree, he felt he must have gone quite mad, and he did not like the feeling at all. And Anthea called out, "Don't be frightened," and felt hastily in her pocket for a threepenny bit with a hole in it, which she had meant to hang on a ribbon round her neck for luck. She hovered round the unfortunate plum owner and said, "We have had some of your plums. We thought it wasn't stealing, but now I'm not so sure, so here's some money to pay for them." She swooped down towards the terror-stricken grower of plums and slipped the coin into the pocket of his jacket, and in a few flaps she had rejoined the others. The farmer sat down on the grass, suddenly and heavily. "Well, I'm blessed. This here is what they call delusions, I suppose. But this here threepenny," he had pulled it out and bitten it, "that's real enough. Well, from this day forth, I'll be a better man. It's the kind of thing to sober a chap for life, this is." He got up, slowly and heavily, and went indoors, and he was so nice to his wife that day that she felt quite happy. So perhaps the winged children really did do one good thing that day. If so, it was the only one, for really there is nothing like wings for getting you into trouble. But on the other hand, if you are in trouble, there is nothing like wings for getting you out of it. This was the case in the matter of the fierce dog, who sprang out at them when they had folded up their wings as small as possible and were going up to a farm door to ask for a crust of bread and cheese, for in spite of the plums they were soon just as hungry as ever again. Now there is no doubt whatever that if the four had been ordinary wingless children, that black and fierce dog would have had a good bite out of the brown-stockinged leg of Robert, who was the nearest. But at first growl there was a flutter of wings, and the dog was left to strain at his chain and stand on his hind legs as if he were trying to fly too. They tried several other farms, but at those where there were no dogs, the people were far too frightened to do anything but scream, and at last, when it was nearly 4 o'clock, and their wings were getting miserably stiff and tired, they alighted on a church tower and held a council of war. "We can't possibly fly all the way home without dinner or tea," said Robert with desperate decision. "And nobody will give us any dinner, or even lunch, let alone tea," said Cyril. "If the country you're in won't sell provisions, you take them. In wars, I mean. I'm quite certain you do. Look, there's a larder window at the side of the clergyman's house, and I saw things to eat inside, custard pudding and cold chicken and tongue, and pies and jam. It's rather a high window, but with wings. How clever of you," said Jane. "Not at all," said Cyril modestly. "Any born general, Napoleon or the Duke of Marlborough, would have seen it just the same as I did." "We'll club our money, though, and leave it to pay for the things, won't we?" Anthea was persuasive, and very nearly in tears, because it is most trying to feel enormously hungry and unspeakably sinful at one and the same time. "Some of it," was the cautious reply. Everyone now turned out its pockets on the lead roof of the tower. There was 5 and 7 halfpenny altogether, and even the upright Anthea admitted that was too much to pay for 4 people's dinners. Robert said he thought 18 pence, and half a crown was finally agreed to be handsome. So Anthea wrote on the back of her last term's report, which happened to be in her pocket, and from which she first tore her own name and that of the school, the following letter. "Dear Reverend Clergyman, we are very hungry indeed, because of having to fly all day, and we think it is not stealing when you are starving to death. We are afraid to ask you, for fear you should say no, because, of course, you know about angels, but you would not think we were angels. We will take only the necessities of life, and no pudding or pie, to show you it is not greediness, but true starvation that makes us make your larder stand and deliver. But we are not highwaymen by trade. Our intentions are quite honourable if only you knew. And here is half a crown to show we are sincere and grateful. Thank you for your kind hospitality. From us 4. The half-crown was wrapped in this letter, and all the children felt that when the clergyman had read it, he would understand everything. "Now," said Cyril, "of course there's some risk. We'd better fly straight down the other side of the tower and then flutter low across the churchyard and in through the shrubbery. The window is embowered in foliage, like a window in a story. I'll go in and get things. Robert and Anthea can take them as I hand them out through the window, and Jane can keep watch, her eyes are sharp, and whistle if she sees anyone about. It ought not to be a very good whistle. It'll sound more natural and bird-like. Now then, off we go." I cannot pretend that stealing is right. I can only say that on this occasion it did not look like stealing to the hungry 4. They had never happened to learn that tongue, hardly cut into, a chicken and a half, a loaf of bread, and a siphon of soda water cannot be bought in shops for half a crown. These were the necessities of life, which Cyril handed out of the larder window when, quite unobserved and without hindrance or adventure, he had led the others to that happy spot. Everything was carried up to the top of the tower and laid down on a sheet of kitchen paper, which Cyril had found on the top shelf of the larder. Now, I dare say you will have noticed that if you wait for your dinner till long after the proper time, and then eat a great deal more dinner than usual, and sit in the hot sun on the top of the church tower, or even anywhere else, you become soon and strangely sleepy. One by one, the children left off talking and leaned back, and before it was a quarter of an hour after dinner, they had all curled round and tucked themselves up under their large, soft, warm wings, and were fast asleep. And the sun was sinking slowly in the west. The shadow of the church tower fell across the churchyard and across the vicarage and across the field beyond, and presently there were no more shadows, and the sun had set, and the wings were gone. and still the children slept. But not for long. Twilight is very beautiful, but it is chilly. Soon the 4 wingless children shivered and woke. And there they were, on the top of a church tower in the dusky twilight, with blue stars coming out by 1s and 2s and 10s and 20s over their heads, miles away from home, with 3 and 3 halfpence in their pockets, and a doubtful act about the necessities of life to be accounted for if anyone found them with the soda-water siphon. They looked at each other. Cyril spoke first, picking up the siphon. "We'd better get along down and get rid of this beastly thing. It's dark enough to leave it on the clergyman's doorstep, I should think. Come on." There was a little turret at the corner of the tower, and the little turret had a door in it. They had noticed this when they were eating, but had not explored it, as you would have done in their place. Because, of course, when you have wings and can explore the whole sky, doors hardly seem worth exploring. Now they turned towards it. "Of course," said Cyril. "This is the way down." It was. But the door was locked on the inside. And the world was growing darker and darker, and there were miles from home, and there was the soda-water siphon. Whether anyone cried or not, there was certainly an interval during which none of the party was quite itself. When they grew calmer, Anthea said, "It can't be for more than one night. We can signal with our handkerchiefs in the morning, and someone will come up and let us out." "And find the siphon," said Cyril gloomily, "and we shall be sent to prison for stealing." "You said it wasn't stealing. You said you were sure it wasn't." "I'm not sure now," said Cyril shortly. "But we can't stay up here all night," said Jane. "I want my tea." "You can't want your tea," said Robert. "You've only just had your dinner." "But I do want it," she said, "especially when you begin talking about stopping up here all night. Oh, Panther, I want to go home, I want to go home." "Hush, hush," Anthea said. "Don't, dear. It'll be all right somehow. Don't. "Let her cry," said Robert desperately. "If she howls loud enough, someone may hear and come and let us out." "And see the soda-water thing?" said Anthea swiftly. "Robert, don't be a brute." "Now, look here," said Cyril slowly. "We must risk that siphon. I'll button it up inside my jacket. Perhaps no one will notice it. You others keep well in front of me. There are lights in the clergyman's house. They're not gone to bed yet. We must just yell as loud as ever we can. Now all scream when I say 3. Robert, you do the yell like the railway engine, and I'll do the cooey like Father's. The girls can do as they please. 1, 2, 3. The 4-fold yell rent the silent peace of the evening, and a maid at one of the vicarage windows paused with her hand on the blind cord. 1, 2, 3! Another yell startled the owls and starlings to a flutter of feathers in the belfry below. The maid fled from the vicarage window and down the vicarage stairs and into the vicarage kitchen and fainted as soon as she had explained to the manservant and the cook that she had seen a ghost. 1, 2, 3! The vicar was on his doorstep by this time, and there was no mistaking the yell that greeted him. "Good gracious," he said to his wife. "My dear, someone's been murdered in the church. Give me my hat and a thick stick, and tell Andrew to come after me. I expect it's the lunatic who stole the tongue." "Oh, you can't go," said his wife. "Not alone. Jessie," the maid unfainted and came out of the kitchen, "send Andrew at once. There's a dangerous lunatic in the church, and he must go immediately and catch it." "I expect he will catch it too," said Jessie to herself as she went through the kitchen door. "Here, Andrew," she said. "There's someone screaming like mad in the church, and the missus says you're to go along and catch it." "Not alone, I don't," said Andrew in low, firm tones. To his master he merely said, "Yes, sir." "You heard those screams?" "I did think I noticed a sort of something," said Andrew. "Well, come on then," said the vicar. "My dear, I must go." He pushed her gently into the sitting room, banged the door, and rushed out, dragging Andrew by the arm. A volley of yells greeted them. As it died into silence, Andrew shouted, "Hello? You there? Did you call?" "Yes!" shouted 4 faraway voices. "They seem to be in the air," said the vicar. "Very remarkable." "Where are you?" shouted Andrew. And Cyril replied in his deepest voice, very slow and loud, "Church! Tower! Top!" "Come down then," said Andrew, and the same voice replied, "Can't! Door locked!" "My goodness," said the vicar. "Andrew, fetch the stable lantern. Perhaps it would be as well to fetch another man from the village." "Were the rest of the gang about very likely?" "No, sir. If this here ain't a trap, well, may I never. There's Cook's cousin at the back door now. He's a keeper, sir, and used to dealing with vicious characters. And he's got his gun, sir." "Hello there!" shouted Cyril from the church tower. "Come up and let us out!" "We're a-coming," said Andrew. "I'm a-going to get a policeman and a gun." So Andrew fetched the lantern and the cook's cousin, and the vicar's wife begged them all to be very careful. They went across the churchyard. The vicar was certain a lunatic was on the church tower, the one who had written the mad letter and taken the cold tongue and things. But the cook's cousin was not at all afraid. But then he had a gun. That was why he was asked to lead the way up the worn, steep, dark steps of the church tower. They went on, and at the top of that there was a little door. The door was bolted on the stair side. The cook's cousin, who was a gamekeeper, kicked at the door and said, "Hello? You there?" The children were holding on to each other on the other side of the door and trembling with anxiousness, but Cyril managed to reply huskily, "Hello? You there?" "How did you get up there?" It was no use saying, "We flew up." So Cyril said, "We got up, and then we found the door was locked and we couldn't get down. Let us out, do." "How many of you are there?" asked the keeper. "Only 4, said Cyril. "I've got my gun handy, so you best not try any tricks. If we open the door, will you promise to come quietly down and no nonsense?" "Yes, oh yes," said all the children together. "Bless me," said the vicar. "Surely that was a female voice." "Shall I open the door, sir?" said the keeper. Andrew went down a few steps, "to leave room for the others," he said afterwards. "Yes," said the vicar. "Open the door." "Remember," he said through the keyhole, "we have come to release you. You will keep your promise to refrain from violence." When all the bolts were drawn, the keeper spoke deep-chested words through the keyhole. "I don't open," he said, "till you've gone over to the other side of the tower, and if one of you comes at me, I fire." "No." "We're all over the other side," said the voices. The keeper felt pleased with himself, and owned himself a bold man when he threw open the door, and stepping out into the leads, flashed the full light of the stable lantern onto the group of desperadoes standing against the parapet on the other side of the tower. He lowered his gun, and he nearly dropped the lantern. "So help me," he cried, "if they ain't a pack of kiddies!" The vicar now advanced. "How did you come here?" he said severely. "Tell me at once." "Oh, take us down," said Jane, catching at his coat, "and we'll tell you anything you like. You won't believe us, but it doesn't matter. Oh, take us down." The others crowded round him with the same entreaty. All but Cyril. He had enough to do with a soda-water siphon, which would keep slipping down under his jacket. It needed both hands to keep it steady in its place. They were taken down, and at last they reached the bottom of the winding stair and stepped out onto the flags of the church porch. Then suddenly the keeper caught Cyril and Robert each by an arm. "You bring along the girls, sir," he said. "You and Andrew can manage them." So they were all marched into the vicarage study, and the vicar's wife came rushing in. "Oh, William, are you safe?" she cried. Robert hastened to allay her anxiety. "Oh, yes," he said. "He's quite safe. We haven't hurt him at all. And please, we're very late and they'll be anxious at home. Could you send us home in your carriage?" The vicar had sunk into a chair, overcome by emotion and amazement. "But how did you come to be locked up in the church tower?" he asked. "We went up," said Robert slowly, "and we were tired, and we all went to sleep, and when we woke up we found the door was locked. So we yelled." "I should think you did," said the vicar's wife, "frightening everybody out of their wits like this. You ought to be ashamed of yourselves." "We are," said Jane gently. "But who locked the door?" asked the vicar. "I don't know at all," said Robert with perfect truth. "Do please send us home." "Well, really," said the vicar, "I suppose we'd better. Andrew, put the horse to, and you take them home." "Not alone, I don't," said Andrew to himself. "And," the vicar went on, "let this be a lesson to you." He went on talking, and the children listened miserably. But the keeper was not listening. He was looking at the unfortunate Cyril. He knew all about poachers, of course, so he knew how people looked when they were hiding something. The vicar had just got to the part about trying to grow up to be a blessing to your parents and not a trouble and a disgrace, when the keeper suddenly said, "Ask him what he's got there under his jacket." And Cyril knew that concealment was at an end. So he stood up and squared his shoulders and tried to look noble, and he pulled out the soda-water siphon and said, "Well, there you are then." There was a silence. Cyril went on. There was nothing else for it. "Yes, we took this out of your larder, and some chicken and tongue and bread. We were very hungry, and we didn't take the custard or jam. We only took bread and meat and water. And we couldn't help its being the soda kind, just the necessities of life. And we left £0.50 to pay for it, and we left a letter, and we're very sorry. And my father will pay a fine or anything you like, but don't send us to prison. Mother would be so vexed. We're as sorry as we can be. There." "How did you get up to the larder window?" said Mrs. Vicar. "I can't tell you that," said Cyril firmly. "Is this the whole truth you've been telling me?" asked the clergyman. "No," answered Jane suddenly. "It's all true, but it's not the whole truth. We can't tell you that. It's no good asking. Oh, do forgive us and take us home." She ran to the vicar's wife and threw her arms around her. The vicar's wife put her arms round Jane, and the keeper whispered behind his hand to the vicar, "They're all right, sir. I expect it's a pal they're standing by. Someone put 'em up to it and they won't peach. Game little kids." "Tell me," said the vicar kindly, "are you screening someone else? Had anyone else anything to do with this?" "Yes," said Anthea, thinking of the Psammead, "but it wasn't their fault." "Very well, my dears," said the vicar. "Then let's say no more about it. Only just tell us why you wrote such an odd letter." "I don't know," said Cyril. "You see, Anthea wrote it in such a hurry, and it really didn't seem like stealing then. But afterwards, when we found we couldn't get down off the church tower, it seemed just exactly like it. We're all very sorry." "Say no more about it," said the vicar's wife. "But another time, just think before you take other people's tongues. Now, some cake and milk before you go home?" So you see, the children got off better than they deserved. The gamekeeper, who was the cook's cousin, asked leave to drive home with them, and Andrew was only too glad to have someone to protect him. End of Side 2.